Alrighty, this is a presentation or on a paper that came out this year, which was a review on e-waste. And the title of this paper is called E-Waste Derived Microplastics and Metals, Challenges, Mechanisms, and Sustainable Mitigation Strategies. So just to do a quick overview of what we see in this paper. So it's a review of a lot of literature that has already been done, a lot of papers that have already been done on e-waste and contamination. And the focus of this paper is to just review all of those, look at what do we know, what do we not know, and present some mitigation strategies for combating the pollution, environmental pollution from e-waste. So this is just a little sort of graphic which just shows the contamination, how it moves through an environment, what it does, then how can you find it and potentially remove it. So just a few things to go over. So with e-waste, there's a bunch of different plastics that come from e-waste, and plastics and metals are both important to e-waste, as we will see. So different parts of, housing and electronics have different plastics, and these are the different types of plastics and the major metals that you'll see with these plastics as well. So here's just a list. So you have display panels, power supply, housing, PCBs, things like that. So how do these interact in the soil? Well, what will happen is that it will adsorb. So metals will adsorb to the surface of the microplastics, and that we call the MPs for short. So it'll basically you have an ion, so a tiny little ion of a metal, and that will cling on to the surface of the microplastic. And we call them the microplastics a vector of transport, meaning that the microplastics will be able to move and then the metals will just be, stuck onto their surface. So as a microplastic moves through an ecosystem, right, an environmental system, those metals will also carry with it, which means that everywhere that the microplastic goes, not only you have plastic contamination, but you also have metal contamination. Of course, this can then lead to uh, root uptake and groundwater, and then through the food chain, which can eventually go to humans. Um, and they can move through the soil. So what'll happen is that you'll see that they can go down into this groundwater, right? And it was found that areas where they have a microplastic, you have your metal concentration up to uh, almost 800 times more than the ambient soil, meaning that uh, it's just a significant indicator that these microplastics are causing these regions of high concentration, meaning that metals and microplastics kind of go to the same place, meaning that metals go onto the microplastic. So, how does this get influenced? So, with e-waste, right? Um, how your microplastics are generated through fragmentation. You have breakdown or weakening of the plastics through UV radiation, i.e., the sun, over time. And what the difference between fragmented microplastics versus other microplastics that may just exist, right? When you have it fragmented and compared to, like, let's say a fiber, right? The fragments, right? They have these little crevices, these irregular surfaces. And what that does, that means that your surface area increases. And it also means those are more areas where your metals can then adsorb onto the surface of said microplastic. So then a few things about the microplastic itself that can influence how many metals can absorb onto it. So you have things like the polarity of the plastic. So different plastics have different additives. So take PVC, for example. PVC is a plastic that has the highest amount, one of the highest amount of metal, has really high metal adsorption. And basically what happens is that um, because PVC has chlorine um, right inside of the plastic, right? That chloride is what is attracting so much metal ions to its surface. Of course, you also have things like microbial biofilms. Since these are in soil, you can have microorganisms which form a sort of biofilm around the plastic, which just adds another layer and further, further addition to why they adsorb. And then you also have things like the pH of the soil. So if sometimes if your pH is higher, this will mean and allow more microplastics or more metals to absorb onto the surface of the microplastic. You have salinity and surrounding temperature, just as a few other factors as well from the environment. So mitigation strategies that the paper talked about. So you have, of course, if you have a plant, some, recycling plant for e-waste, if you're doing any sort of mechanical shredding, you need to make sure that you have advanced dust and particle recapture technology to make sure it does not escape your system. I also talked about bioremediation and electrocoagulation, and what these are microplastic focused mitigation techniques. So the bioremediation, so this mold right here that we see can break down these microplastics and then up to 75%. However, you need certain treatments to make sure that the metals from that are adsorbed don't impact the mold because those can potentially kill the mold. So you have to do treatment with that. And then, of course, electrocoagulation. So this is just, using electricity to coagulate your microplastic particles um, to remove them. And then we have phytoremediation, and this is using plants, and this is a metal-focused strategy. So these two plants that right here um, that were provided in the paper as examples, they are what are called high uptake plants, meaning that they will uptake a lot of the metals. So this is a mustard plant, I believe, a specific breed, and this is a sort of like grass type plant. And essentially, these plants, they'll just absorb a lot of these metals and remove them from the system. So a few questions we have for this paper. It doesn't really talk about how quickly microplastics form from the e-waste and subsequently how many metals have absorbed, so essentially, right, how quickly does this whole entire process that we described we talk about, how quickly does that happen? We also have in this paper, it mentions a lot of e-waste and dump sites. How do you isolate these sites where the contamination has already occurred and then, use the strategies to remove them? And then, of course, the mitigation strategies that they said. Why have we not seen too much talk about these different strategies yet? What issues, what barriers do we have in these strategies that haven't been mentioned? They're just presented, but not also with their many of their cons. So yeah, that's this quick little presentation.